I want a big shout out to all of the people in the past and now currently who are bringing this workshop to a new level of technology where, in fact, we're experimenting with the Zoom, and quite frankly, from my standpoint, it's so easy, and I hope it's relevant and meaningful, and it might add a new dimension to the work that everybody will do. So, several things. I've made some notes, bullet points, and I'd like to cover them in the time that we have. This is a workshop. The key is work. It'll feel like a class because there's assignments and there's discussion and there's work. And maybe there's accountability. That'll be really up to you. But it's a process that's absolutely magical. Quite frankly, there aren't words to express the experience that you will have. And we can speak this way without qualification because of the hundreds, now thousands of people that have experienced it through the telephone workshop as well as the on-the-ground workshops. I've been doing on-the-ground workshops for 23 years. Now I do it in 2 different locations each week. So on the web, there is a wonderful, I think, record of the work and the interaction of people about the work. The questions themselves and the dialogue are almost as important as the teaching that I give on the recording. And there are 52, we've just revised it now, there are 52 recordings, so that's 1 a week, and they're anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. This workshop will take at least a year. I'm not limiting it to a year, but because we want to have a very special experience this year. I have worked the steps from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous 4 different times: 1988, 1991, 1994, and 2003. Those are not important dates for you. Obviously, they're important dates for me. And those, the implication of those dates will emerge as we go through, especially step 1, because my experience with step 1 was progressive. It was an evolution to the revolution. The evolution is the organic process. The revolution is the product. And that is a change that I couldn't have created by myself. 1 and 1 make 2 in the material world. But in the spiritual world, 1 and 1 make 5. And it's not an exaggeration. You and I will do an awful lot of work, but the outcome of the work will be disproportionately larger than our contribution to it. We use the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we use the 4th edition. If you have a prior edition to the 4th edition, terrific. Put it on a shelf. Get a 4th edition. If you have a 4th edition and it has any markings of any substance or highlighter or margin notes, put it on the shelf. Get a new one, because I want you to have a new experience. I'm going to have a new experience with you. I am going to participate in doing this work myself with you as my accountability partner, at least my sounding board for my knowledge, my questions, and my experience. So it's going to be a very different experience for me also. The last time I did the work was with Mark Houston in 2003, and I haven't done formally the work 1 through 12 since then. So I'm also looking for a new experience. My life has had a major shift in its own reality. My wife of 52 years died last year. I thought I was done with that. In fact, it was March of last year. We just celebrated her 1-year anniversary, and it was wonderful. We are celebrating her life. We had 52 years together. We have 3 adult children, 2 of whom are in program 29 years, 1 in AA, 1 in Al-Anon, and 7 grandchildren. So it's a very recovered family. Both of those daughters married men in a 12-step program who also have 30 years of sobriety themselves. I want to make it really clear, I have no rules. I'm pausing. Please hear that. I have no rules. If you hear any rules about the workshop, they did not come from me. I have no rules. I have knowledge and I have an experience. I'm going to share my knowledge and my experience so that you can get some knowledge and have an experience. And that's really up to you. And each of you has your own approach to study. Some will do it in pieces in a logical, organized way, and some of you will do last minute, and some of you will get behind because of procrastination. It's just what is. It's the human condition. Don't judge it. But if you want to have your most effective and powerful experience from this work, it is better to do it in an organized fashion. It is better to do it in a consistent fashion. It is better to be diligent about it. It is better to have it as a priority and a value. What I've had to do, and because I'm doing the work with you, I'm really getting a compassion for the people who attend my workshops, because it does take time to read and reflect and write, and read and reflect and write. And what I've had to do, which I'm an organized and disciplined person, so I have that good fortune. It's not my fault. It's just organic. I set an appointment with myself. I look at my calendar for the week and I set appointments for doing this work. That works for me. It's maybe a good hint for you. We also use the AA 12 and 12. Now, it hasn't been revised, so any 12 and 12 that you have that's an AA 12 and 12, we don't use it to discuss on the conference call, on the workshop, but we do use it as a supplemental reading, because it was Bill's experience at 12 or 13 years of sobriety. It was written in 1951, published in 1953. So he was 20 plus, maybe a little under 20 years sober when he wrote it and published it. And so it's a really good commentary on each of the steps. And so I give that as piece of a part of the assignment when we do it. You can go to the website and download the assignments. There's like 30, I think, assignments, and I will be referring to them, so it will be a benefit for you to have those assignments. Also, there's a way of life document that may or may not have been distributed to you. If it hasn't, that's fine. It's on the website. You will need to, I really recommend that you download it to hard copy and 3-hole punch it if it's 3-hole or 2-hole, whatever it is, in terms of the way you put it in a container, so that it's available to you also, because I will be referring to it. Those are the 2 primary support documents for this workshop. One are the assignments, so that we don't have to be elaborate about just giving the assignments or repeating them, and also the way of life document. Other than those 2 books, the big book, which is the primary textbook for us, and the 12 and 12, which is the supplemental reading commentary, you will need a dictionary. It's really a wonderful resource for us. And whether you use a technology dictionary or a hard copy dictionary from whatever resource that you have, a current dictionary. I have dictionaries from the 1900s, 1940, also when Bill wrote the book, and then current dictionaries. I have French, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. so that I can get into the word derivatives, and you will benefit from my understanding of those words. If you want to have additional dictionaries, that's your business. But an English, yeah, because we're speaking English, an English dictionary would be a kind of a requisite. And once again, I have no rules. I have very strong suggestions. You may have also been given a participant agreement. And I would like to have that participant agreement read and signed. It's your acknowledgement that this workshop will stir up some stuff in you that has been either suppressed unconsciously or repressed consciously. And that stuff that you haven't wanted to look at or even didn't know that was there, and it will be surfaced. This is the roto-rooter of the spirituality, this work. In fact, the original group, the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous, called it soul surgery. Soul surgery. Now, nobody likes surgery, but everybody likes the benefit of surgery. The surgery is painful, but the benefit is restored health and freedom and life. And the parallel is perfect. I'm not even going to comment on it. We have a cancer, a spiritual cancer of the soul. This is the way the Oxford group talked. This is the way the early AA talked. The spiritual malady is the problem. The addiction is not the problem. Addiction is a problem, but it's not the problem. That's the first half of the first step. The second half of the first step, unmanageability, Bill says in the big book many times. That's the problem. That's the spiritual malady. That's the worm in the wood. That's the cancer in the soul. And we'll be focusing on that. This year, I've taken a brand new approach to working the steps in my workshops and even with individuals, of course. And that is to focus on this primary issue that's captured in the 12th step. It says, having had a spiritual awakening. That means we're spiritually asleep. This is the unmanageability that the big book talks about, the spiritual malady. And so we're going to focus on that. Right at the beginning, we're going to start with step 12, then we're going to look at step 11, and then we're going to look at step 10. These are the tools of our way of life, Bill calls it. That's the phrase. You'll hear it over and over and over again from me. This is our way of life. Bill refers to it 20 plus times in the big book. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are the program for living. Steps 1 through 9 are the program for recovery. He says the deflation of the ego will take place in steps 1 through 9. We will be transformed. We will be awakened. We will be placed in a position of neutrality toward our addiction. But we have a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Steps 10, 11, and 12. So we're going to unpack those, but we're going to do it backwards because I want to focus on step 12, the part that is a spiritual awakening. There are 3 parts to step 12. I'm only going to focus on that first part, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's the mission here. This is the purpose. This is the value proposition, a spiritual awakening. So I want you to read, well, first of all, it's in assignment 1, but I want you to read appendix 2 in the back of the book. Read and highlight it because it confirms what is a spiritual awakening and what is a spiritual experience. It also confirms how they're the same and how they're different. And we'll talk about it next week. But that's the point of this whole 1-year program and process, is to have that experience that they're describing there. 1 and 1 make 5. a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. And I'll unpack that in much more detail next week. The man who took me through the work, and I hope you're looking at the screen, and a real advantage now of this is that I don't have to describe some of my words. You can actually see me do this. At 4 years of sobriety, I got sober in 1984. At 4 years of sobriety, I met a man who I knew something that, and had an experience that I had never had. And so I asked him to help me with the steps. And as part of the getting acquainted, I allowed him, I revealed to him my background, etc., which is an extensive academic background. And more about that later. But then he did this. Herb, wow, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. That gesture changed my life. Wow. Because I knew that he knew, and I knew that I didn't. And he said, he quoted Einstein, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. Bill knew it. We need a spiritual awakening. We're asleep, dreaming that we're awake. He knew that we needed to wake up spiritually, and that was the key to a relationship with power. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. We need a new consciousness. And in the big book, there are several references, and I'll make reference to some of them as we go through our journey together over time. But on page 58, Bill says, some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. And he said to me, can you let go of your old knowledge and your own experience? Absolutely. And I knew it wasn't a trick question, and I responded, absolutely not. I knew that I could not do that. I was viscerally and culturally invested in my knowledge and in my experience. And he introduced me to the set-aside prayer. A prayer that's just based on a commitment to have an open mind and an open heart. It's not an official prayer. It was a prayer that was originally crafted about 40 years ago by some men in Denver, Colorado, and I'll share that story also later on as we get more acquainted with each other and the way the workshop works. And that also is in the Way of Life document on the inside of the cover page. So you'll want to have that available, because we will start each workshop with the set-aside prayer, and we will end each workshop either with the Serenity Prayer or with the prayer of St. Francis. The Serenity Prayer is one of my favorite prayers because it asks for wisdom to know what reality is. One of the things I discovered is that human beings cannot see reality objectively. Never, never, never. Because we have a pair of glasses. Whether we have glasses or not, we have lenses through which we look at reality, and the lenses color the reality. We always see reality as we are. We never see reality objectively. Our perception of reality, no matter how evolved we are, emotionally or spiritually, our perception is always subjective. I want you to ask yourself a question. The questions are so much more important than the answers. And we will give you questions from the big book. Joe and Charlie said the questions are so much more important than the answers, and you'll recognize the questions because at the end of the sentence, there's a question mark. Oh, I love humor and I love simplicity. But they said, treat the question mark as a stop sign. If there's a question there, stop. Ask yourself the question. Does this apply to me? What's my understanding of even the question? What's my experience with exploring that question or the answers to that question. What's my opinion? What's my experience? What's my attitude about the question and about the answers to the question? That's called meditation, by the way. The week after next, we'll be taking a look deeply at what is meditation. But here's the question, and it's so much more important than the answer. Because if you get answers where you don't have questions, you've got no place to hang it. It will be information, but it won't be transformation. It will be academic knowledge that will go in the head, but it won't be a life-changing experience that comes from the heart and moves the feet in a different direction. The question for you, simple question. And please, you do not need to share the answer to this question with anybody. I mean anybody, sponsor, step guide, mother, father, significant other. You don't need to share this with anybody. I want you to be radically and transparently honest. Radically, coming from the Latin word radix, at the root of your soul. Reflect on the question. Stop, ponder it. In the milieu of prayer, the serenity prayer, or once you're familiar with it, the set-aside prayer. Take some time with it. This question, so simple question, but it's established the baseline for your workshop, for your experience, for your journey. Why are you here? Why did you respond to the invitation to come to this workshop? Hundreds of people were aware of this workshop, but you responded to the invitation. Something in you heard something. I mean, weekly, 1.5 hours, maybe another additional 2 to 4 hours. Huge commitment. Why are you here? Get really clear. And the second question, what's the primary source of your suffering? Now, many of you heard a different question than I asked. Many of you heard a question, what is your suffering? That wasn't my question. The question is, what is the primary source of your suffering? The primary source. And it's okay if you don't know. Be rigorously, transparently honest with yourself. You'll never have to share it with anybody. Any of the work that you do in this workshop, similarly, do it for yourself. Attempt to be as radically, rigorously honest as you can be. Rigorous is the term in the big book. I turn the burner up on that. Radical. It's rigorous on steroids. Bill says rigorous honesty is the key. He spent a lot of time on the beginning of the chapter 5 on how it works and talking about honesty and the capacity to be honest for a good reason. We'll talk lots more about that later. Carl Jung was the one that told Roland Hazard back in 1932. Carl Jung, the famed psychiatrist. You're a drunk and I can't help you. After a year, the man stayed sober but got drunk, and Carl Jung said, can't help you. You're going to have to find a spiritual experience. And Roland said, great, I'll go back to church. And Carl Jung may have said, young man, you're not listening. I didn't say church. I didn't say organized religion. I didn't say any type of traditional religious involvement. I said you need to find a spiritual experience. Fortunately, Roland did go back to New York, and he did go back to church where his parents were members of the Episcopal Cathedral in New York. And fortunately, in the basement of that cathedral, the Oxford group was meeting. The Oxford group was about first century Christianity. It wasn't about alcohol. They didn't even like alcoholics. But because Roland had some prestige in the community, he was a multimillionaire, they wanted his influence. And so they said, well, you can stay. We don't deal with alcoholics. We deal with Christians who want to create first century Christianity and have a transformation and a conversion experience. They're talking about the gospel and the New Testament and being Christians. And Roland was all of that. And he took their 6 steps. And he did their 6 steps. And his alcohol problem was removed. Well, their 6th step is to carry the message to somebody else. Roland carried it to Ebby Thatcher, another millionaire who was having problems with alcohol. And of course, when Ebby Thatcher completed the 6 steps, he got free of his alcohol. And he followed the 6th step by reaching out to Bill Wilson, who wasn't a millionaire by birth, but had acquired a wealth and reputation in the New York area and was a running buddy of Ebby's. And Bill got sober in the Oxford group, and then 6 months later reached out to Bob Smith, who was in the Oxford group already. A story for a different day. Again, I'm putting a lot off till later on when we have more time. And Bob finally got sober. He'd been in the Oxford group 2.5 years and couldn't get sober because he thought it was a knowledge issue and a moral issue and a willpower issue. And Bill came and shared his experience of alcohol and what the powerlessness really meant. And he got it for the very first time. Dr. Smith stayed sober then until he died in 1950. And they co-founded Alcoholics Anonymous, and we got on our way. It's an organic process. And the promise is not happiness. The promise is freedom. Freedom from the addiction, first half of the first step. Freedom from the spiritual malady, second half of the first step. But not until you finish the first 9 steps. There are indications of anticipated experience in step 3. There's indications of additional transformational experience in step 5. Just indications, not the promise. The promise of transformation and freedom from addiction is in the 10th step after we finish the 9th step. It's a process. It's a hand-in-glove organic process. Each step builds on the next step. Each step builds on the prior step. A hand-in-glove kind of organic process. I've given you prayer to set aside. I've given you reading now. These are the constituent parts of the process. I've asked you to reflect on the reading. I've actually asked you to reflect on a couple questions and actually do some writing. Those are more components of this process. And eventually we will be discussing some of your observations and some of your experience. Lean gently into it. This is not any type of violence at all. There is some discipline involved, meaning that you have a value proposition and that you will make decisions to do some work, to give up some time, to give up some energy, to embrace some difficult concepts, to embrace some difficult self-realizations. But trust it, trust this process. In 1988, I was 4 years sober. I did the work with this man. It took a year. We met weekly and we reviewed and applied the instructions in the big book to my personal life. And at the end of that year, 1988, I realized I had been transformed. radically changed. And it launched me into a world of the spirit that I had been searching for all my life, but had never known it existed and certainly had never accessed it. And the really nice part about that is that it's a world of light and it's infinite light. So there is no end to it. Be prepared to be surprised. Be prepared to be taken to a place that you don't even know exists. Be prepared to be changed radically in ways that you can't anticipate. And you will only recognize down the road when you stop on the path and you look back over your shoulder in retrospect, and then you will realize. That's one of the reasons I gave you those two initial questions. We're launched. Buckle up. You're in for one hell of a ride. And I look forward to being the lantern that stands by the side of this path that we're walking, shining the light of my experience on the path so that you can walk the path in the light of my experience, but have your own experience. I am not one bit interested in you having my experience. I am very interested in you having your own experience. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.